Hi, this is Sean Murphy for SK Murphy. I want to welcome you to the Wednesday, September 27th event for Lean Culture and the Lean Startup Circle of Silicon Valley. We're fortunate today to have a briefing on finding product market fit in industrial IoT and space startups. The talk is by Lee Garverick. Lee's goal is that you leave with a playbook for product definition, whether you're a founder or a product manager. Lee has a degree in computer science from UC Davis. Her first job was writing games for a startup. She then worked for HP, an Apple IBM joint venture, and then started her own marketing firm. For the last 13 years, she's worked as a product manager for a variety of startups attacking either the industrial IoT or space markets. Lee?
Thank you all for coming. Let's get started. I'm going to just give a couple of basics. What is space and what is industrial Internet of Things? So space is this global economy of activities for research, exploration, and utilization in space. $500 billion in 2022 market size, up to 1.8 trillion by 2032. The use case I hear the most about is Earth observation for weather, for shipping, for climate, so looking down at Earth, taking pictures, doing sensor work there. Also satellite television, ubiquitous internet, GPS, tourism, national security is a bigger proportion than the size of this bullet conveys. And then industrial Internet of Things, that's this whole economy of devices, sensors, and applications that work together to collect, monitor, analyze, integrate data from industrial operations. And in my case, I'm using an industrial in a pretty broad word. Maybe the word is really commercial, but integrating devices and software. $500 billion also in 2022, 3.3 trillion by 2030, all kinds of industries. So here we're going to talk about what is product market fit and why is this so important. Comparisons between business space and IIoT in the context of thinking about product market fit. And then the bulk of this presentation, the most important part of these three key points that you should come away with. One is, what are some techniques you can use coming from B2B thought process in space and industrial IoT to find product market fit. In other words, to set up your business for success. How to think about dual use between commercial and defense opportunities. You often find this in space and in IoT. And then thinking about platforms so you can grow faster, further faster. And then finally, some thoughts about mindset shifts when you're in these markets, working with these highly technical people that are needed to address them. So what is product market fit and why is it so important? So I've got a picture here from Dan Olson's book. I think he actually pulled it from somewhere else. I highly recommend his book. And also just to set the stage of importance, Mark Andreessen, who's one of the most well-known VCs, venture capitalists in the industry, says the only thing that matters is getting to product market fit for a startup. That means being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market. Now let's go back and look at this hierarchy here. Notice that the bottom of the pyramid is the target customer, the target market, meaning the most important thing really before you think about anything else is who is the target customer? Who is this target market? Is it a big market? Is it a market that you can reach? And then do they have underserved needs? Underserved needs, that means either a problem or an opportunity. So a problem that you can solve, a real pain point that they have, or an opportunity that helps them get someplace they want to be. So you want to spend some real time thinking about which target customers you want to go with and how you want to, what are their needs and how you want to serve them. And then you start thinking about what is the value that you want to bring. And then finally you get to what's the feature set and the user experience. So it's very important to think in that order. And if you kind of work backwards, you may end up with a great technology, but there isn't a market that's interested in it, or the market that you've chosen is actually doesn't have much money, so that you can't really fund your business. So it's very important to think in this order. Another basic concept that's really important here is well stated from a consultant named Rich Mironov, that I also recommend you follow. And it's the law of build once, sell many. So as he says, software has a high fixed development cost, so does hardware, but also the opportunity to add users at near zero incremental cost. That means our jobs as software executives is to keep everyone's focus on segments of similar enough customers. Make sure we sell the same bits many times and push back on one-off feature requests. You want to really think hard before you take on something for a single customer that doesn't serve the other customers, and inch you toward custom development. So I love this picture. This is kind of analogous of what you can do to your engineers. If you go after too many different markets and uses, it's kind of like there was this episode of I Love Lucy where they're trying to keep up with the assembly line making chocolates, and they end up trying to stick them in their mouths and all kinds of things to survive the onslaught of chocolate. So some important comparisons here when you look at the differences between space, industrial IoT, and horizontal B2B markets. So market size, they're all big, right? But with space, you've got a short list of very large customers. In industrial IoT, it really varies by the use case there. But generally, if you're in a highly technical field, you have a kind of a smaller list of customers. And then in B2B, you have a broad market. And then breadth of use, kind of in another way of looking at the same topic. You have narrow use cases, very specialized use cases in space. In industrial IoT, they can be fairly narrow. And then just by definition, horizontal B2B, you have a broad set of use cases. And then again, for the types of things, types of customization requests, you have some high need for customization in space, moderate in industrial IoT, and low in horizontal B2B, again, by definition. Otherwise, it's not horizontal, it's vertical.
Lee, a question?
Yeah.
So I thought that the CubeSat innovation in satellite design has had a similar effect to what multi-project wafer did for silicon, where many smaller firms are now able to launch these small satellites into space. Is that not changing things, or am I misunderstanding?
That's happening for sure. Yeah. So you do get kind of a long tail of very small companies that are getting into the space market, in addition to the handful of market leaders.
Second question, how do you balance or address the defense use cases when those are more traditionally one-off custom development requests? So is there a way to start there and then pivot?
Yes, there are a couple ways to look at it. One is start there and pivot, and the other is start with commercial and then pivot into defense. If you start there and pivot, it's a great way to get initial revenue that doesn't dilute your company, your funding. But you can end up in a bit of a one-off application. But if you're thoughtful about it, you might be able to develop something there that you know can be used in a broader market as well. So it's a cool opportunity, requires some creativity. I've got some slides about that also coming up.
Okay.
Okay, and then in looking at your colleagues in these different types of companies, if you're in a horizontal B2B company, that is a fairly mature area in terms of delivering products to customers where SaaS has been around for many, many years. And before that, you had other types of products as well that weren't delivered as SaaS, but were still products. So a culture has developed that I found as I went from one company to another. A lot of the same thought processes are there. And people are used to the idea of a product. But when you get over into some industrial IoT and space, you often have very deeply technical people who have been in contract or research settings. So they don't know what a product really is in some cases, not all. There's a variety of people, of course. But you have to start a little bit earlier up in the explanation process to really articulate what you're doing here and why you're thinking about doing products and what is your methodology for delivering products. So that's just something to think about. So again, comparing between contract development companies and product companies, the business model for a product company is that you want to build something that can be sold repeatedly. Whereas in a contract development company, you want to get as big of a contract as you can every time. So that means you want more engineering work in the contract company, and you want the least possible engineering work in a product company. So your motivations are pretty different. On the product company, you're looking for repeating revenue. And in the contract development company, you're looking for repeating contracts, but each with different work. So then when you look at company margins in a product company, you're looking at like an 80% margin, which is average for successful, healthy SaaS companies. Margin means the profit after you take out costs. Whereas in a contract development company, you're looking at 15% margin. Now, if you want to translate that into other things, you can look at it for the valuation of your company, for the efficiency of your team, and the valuation of these healthy SaaS companies is a much higher multiplier than you get for contract companies because of this kind of margin. Now, in a very, very narrow vertical, that valuation equation may change a bit because there are fewer customers to go after. But you can think about how might we, in our company with our market, move more toward this more efficient and higher value model. I see a comment in here. Is there anything we should talk about, Sean, or should I keep going?
Sorry, I was muted. No, what I've just been doing, Lee, is just summarizing a few of the points that you're making in the chat so that I can use them later to write up the talk. That's all.
Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. So let's talk about how you apply B2B product management techniques in industrial IoT and space. So first of all, another point I want to really hit about this idea of ruthless prioritization. It can really be shocking how time consuming it is to build software and hardware for the engineers. It always looks like, oh, why don't we just do this? Why don't we just, right? Why don't we just do this? But when you get to actually getting it to work in all the different scenarios, in different conditions, it's never just, right? Any decision is a big one of what you take on for engineering. You've got to just ruthlessly prioritize. Ruthlessly. It's really important. So how do you do that? How do you pick your priorities? For a start, it's important to start with one market. So what you want to do is find a group of potential customers who have a lot in common for what they need, and they're a good market so that what you spend all this time on that you just prioritize, it will be worthwhile. And if you can concentrate on a single market, then you can really tailor to what they need. and you can get to a point of positive momentum with the customers that are happy. They're referring you to other customers. You get a consistent sales motion. You get a consistent services motion. All of that comes from focusing on this narrow market. So
we had
yeah.
one question. So there's an observation that there's a challenge when if a startup starts out where they're finding one customer at a time and doing product work, then the horizon between investing effort and getting paid for it is shorter, and the culture evolves around that. How have you seen companies negotiate that transition?
From project to product.
Right. So if you start off on the project foot, because if you're bootstrapping especially, that's a more natural mindset, right?
Right. Yeah, and what you said about bootstrapping, I think, is the key there, where it really depends on the funding model. So if there's some upfront funding, then you're starting to move more toward the product model, where you can invest a little bit and take a little bit more of a accepting a certain market and ruling out others. Whereas if you're not taking any funding, then you're going to be relying on contracts a little bit longer. Things to think about there is, are you building some kind of core intellectual property that's yours from the culmination of all the projects? That's what you want to try to be doing, and moving toward having this core that you're always building on. Okay, so working through the tactics, just the raw tactics of these steps. And these are actually straight out of business to business, but will be new in maybe in some of these more vertical markets. So the first is picking your market and the opportunity. And opportunity, this is from Teresa Torres. You can call it opportunity or you can call it problem. Either way, it's something that you can help them address. And there is a consultant named Teresa Torres that you might want to follow also, that's real big on how you find opportunities and test them out. So picking your market, you can brainstorm potential markets that seem to be a fit. There's a ton of online research that you can do. And then ultimately talking to customers and hearing them talk about what their problems are that in the space of the vision that you're trying to kind of fulfill. Then you want to go out and test both the solution idea and the price. Now let's talk about price for just a second. When you look at the price, then you also can look at potential revenue and potential business model. And then when you look at the solution, you can also look at viability of this idea. And then in the meantime, so you're testing internally and you're also testing with the customers. Does this idea resonate? Are they excited about this? Are you seeing a group of people with some commonality between different companies? It could be multiple customers forming a cohesive market for you. Now, you may find that you've kind of brainstormed, you've kind of picked, and now you're doing this testing and it's not as good as you thought. And you might want to go back and iterate on this a couple of times. That's why I drew the arrow going down as well as steps going up. You want this to be an iterative process until you feel you've got something that's really getting some interest from customers and makes business sense and makes technical sense. Then this is a pretty big leap, but the next thing you want to do is sell. And not to one, but ideally a couple of customers that you feel are representative of this market, that might become references for this market, and that are also willing to work with you on the building process. So in some cases, you can do this with slideware, or some kind of demo to show the idea. In other cases, you need some kind of prototype of your product that they might call the minimum viable product that they could start to use. And you got to kind of use your judgment on what you could get away with. But if you can get away with selling slides in a plan, that's ideal, because then you really get customer involvement the whole time. So a big key in selling at this point is the customers you sell to should want to be part of the building process. So they get a big vote in how the product gets built and it meets their needs. And also, as I said, having more than one so that you're kind of weighing pros and cons of various customer opinions. And then you build and iterate on this minimum viable product. And you want to check in with all the little group of customers weekly if possible. If it's a defense scenario, even if you've got somebody cleared that can sit on the operations floor, that's just ideal. Or, you know, working very closely with these operators that are using what you're building. And then finally, we have step 5, which is scale. There's a common saying, nail it before you scale it. So you really want to be careful with this, because if you got some funding, you're going to be tempted to bring in a bunch of salespeople and get out there and sell over and over. But you need, before you do that, you need a repeatable sales motion and a product that's ready for more than these 3 customers. So you need acceptance with the first 3 first, that they're happy. Then you have some sense that you're getting to product market fit, and then you're ready to scale. Notice again, there are arrows going down at any step of the process. So if you need to rework something, that's just part of the deal. That's how it is, and it's okay. Okay.
So a question on these back arrows. You're looking for 2 or 3 customers so you don't end up doing a custom development. How do you balance not accruing too much tech debt at the same time you're avoiding over optimizing?
So what I would say you want to do there is you want APIs for the features that you're building that are internal, so that new development can access those. You want really good documentation right out from the start. It's okay to cut a few corners at this point, because you're still really kind of testing as you go. So it's okay to accrue a little bit of tech debt at this point. Then later, as you start to scale, that's where you want to dig in and address some of your tech debt, based on which parts are causing your team the most pain.
So you're balancing kind of market risk, or the risk of no market, versus accruing some tech debt.
That's right. Yeah. Now I want to talk about a case study, and I have 2 case studies in this, and this one I'm pulling from 10 years ago, because I want to be sensitive to more recent jobs that I had of protecting their confidentiality. So this one was when I just got right back into product management after running my marketing company, and I was working at a company called Ricoh. They're a big Japanese company. They do printers and copiers, and they had spun up a teeny little Google X type research team in Silicon Valley, hired some people out of Apple, who were charged with coming up with new ideas for where Ricoh might expand. And one of the ideas that they thought they wanted to take to market was this concept of replacing paper, because Ricoh's a big paper-based technology company, and it was a real nice fit for their mission of helping people with documents, basically. But what if we could completely get rid of paper and have devices instead? And then they took it from there to deciding to be in a business setting, and then into a setting where there's forms and signatures. So replace paper forms in business workflows. And that's kind of when I got there. They were looking at multiple target markets. They were thinking about patient intake forms in hospitals and doctors' offices, the forms you fill in the waiting room. They were thinking about deliveries, inspections, also worksheets for students, teaching, the forms that teachers fill in, all the back to school form kind of things. Also on the manufacturing floor. So they had all kinds of ideas, and a pretty sizable total addressable market when you look at all of these segments. But they needed to narrow it down way more. And they decided to start by looking at both patient intake and inspections. And so my first day back on the job, they had me flying to Detroit to sit in a hospital there and watch a patient intake pilot. So we had a prototype that came out of this RICO Innovations Lab. And we looked at how could we integrate this tablet that into a hospital setting. It had a way that you could write on it called e-ink. That's kind of like what you see at the checkout line in the grocery store that you could sign. And a bunch of other cool technology that would then let you easily submit the forms into the back end and have them be routed and tracked and all the things that people were doing in 2010 with paper at the time. So I checked out what I worked with the hospitals to see, how did they feel about this? Did they want to get rid of this back end hassle of getting the form scanned and into the system? What were the things that we were going to have to do for this? Other people were looking at the pricing and the revenue model, and that looked pretty good. They did find it compelling. And at the same time, I also looked at a inspector in a little town in Kansas that was going around inspecting things for the school system, and the types of forms that the inspector would need. And by watching both of them and talking with both of them, both were interesting. In the hospital scenario, we hit a lot of issues with perpetually new people coming in and using this form on the front end. And then on the back end, there was a really complex system of where the forms had to be routed and duplicated and moved around to various people. There was one department that was resistant to electronic forms. The other department liked it, so I saw that the hospital scenario was going to be a lot more engineering to get right. Whereas the inspector was super interested, and it was one person to train per use case. And there's a lot of people doing a lot of kinds of inspections. So we ultimately decided that was the market that we felt we could go after. So kind of looking at all the parts of the target market and the use case and the solution and how compelling it would be before we made that decision. So now, how do you adjust this process to working in space or in industrial IoT? So like I said before, you got to talk to your colleagues a lot and your executive team as well, and get to some consensus on how much you buy into the idea of products, and how much does it make sense in your particular company. And then also, assuming you've got some buy-in on the idea of targeting a market and products, what this process looks like that you're going to take them through. The other thing that's really important is you got to make every customer interaction count. These are smaller, more narrow markets, and they talk to each other, and you don't want to screw up, basically. And I've been at a startup where we were a teeny tiny startup. We worked like crazy to get in the door with some really cool potential customers. And then I realized we hadn't put in as much time as we should to get ready for that interview after all the work we had done to get in the door. So spend a lot of time preparing for these customer visits. If you're the manager of the person actually out doing it, make sure they understand that's the expectation. Have checkpoints way ahead of time. What do you want to find out? What do you want to convey? What's your messaging to these different customers, so that when you get there, you're really, really sharp. It's still great to learn and listen and admit that you're learning from them, but you want to do it in a super professional way. So prepare with care. And then
I want to emphasize that one point, Lee. A lot of people come from the consumer side of lean startup, which the literature tends to encourage founders to treat prospects as lab rats you can buy by the gross. And in these markets, you only have maybe a few hundred total firms in the market. So these interviews are much harder to get and much higher leverage.
Yeah. And then finally, you'll face even higher temptation to sell development contracts instead of products. And in some cases, those are going to make sense to do. They'll be worth pursuing. But you want to scrutinize them and compare the one customer versus the many customers you might get if you went toward a market instead to decide which way you want to go. Okay, let's talk about selling into defense contracts. Just looking at the opportunity, total U.S. military contracts, $400 some billion in 2020, compared to SaaS, which is $100 billion. Now you're looking at contracts, not products, so there's that to consider as well. But this is something worth thinking about. And also, if you feel called to serve the country in that way, it's a really important thing. And I've got a slide at the back that tells you where I got these market figures. So if you're interested in this, also, I highly recommend following a group called Stanford Hacking for Defense, and it's actually a nationwide group as well. A guy named Jeff Decker runs it. He reviewed a paper I wrote also. And there's a lot of thought going on into how you bring commercial products into defense scenarios. So options here, Jeff cites 3 options. I can talk a little bit about number 2 and a lot about number 3. So the first one, he calls it the Iron Man principle, like Tony Stark from Marvel Comics, where you got the brilliant billionaire that can fund great new ideas that really push the industry forward. And that's like Palantir and Anduril were founded in that way. Then you got the second one. This is something Sean mentioned a bit earlier, the defense first way of getting funding. They will often fund new ideas and new research. It's kind of a science project. You got to figure out how to take it from there to commercialization, but it's a good source of funding. And then finally, you got commercial first, paint it camouflage. In other words, take your thing and make it a defense thing instead. So briefly touching on this defense first idea, and I even have a website that you can look at here. So it's business.defense.gov, and they've got all these programs here. The CIBR program is the biggest, one of the bigger ones. Defense Innovation Unit is a group to look at that will, by law, they list all the contracts that are available. So an important thing about this funding is it's non-dilutive, which means you're not selling any shares of your company. Instead, you're getting essentially a grant. So a great way to get some funding. And I mentioned the small contracts for relationships and getting a prototype out. A key point here is you want to work very closely with these users as you deliver on the contract to really understand what they need, while keeping product focus if you can. And as I said, start at business.defense.gov. Now, the reason for working side by side with the users is it can be a challenge to get the subsequent contract. And if you want to keep going with this idea that you've got that's being funded, the close contact with the users is a way to build your credibility and be sure you're delivering what they need. Okay, then we have pivoting into defense if you've got a product. So at this point, you're looking at a new market. So everything we talked about with the markets before and picking one market applies. So when you have product market fit in your initial market and things are going well, then you can think about going after a second market. And that second market might well be defense, something in defense. So you go through kind of the same analysis as you did before, with the exception that in many cases it's one contract instead of a market. So this isn't something you kind of do on the side. It would be a new market when the first market has product market fit. What you can do, though, even in parallel, is start the ball rolling in these relationships toward these funding sources. So if you decide you want to go this route, there are 3 key points to think about there. And one is finding use cases similar to your previous success so that you can reapply the technology that you've already got as close as possible. The second is understand that this is a whole different selling motion than commercial. You probably want to go through existing channels. There are these defense primes that are likely to be a way that you get credibility as part of a larger defense contract. So like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, L3Harris, those kinds of companies. And then as you have early success, again, with this different sales motion, it's also a different type of salesperson, or if you're the founder doing the selling, a way different way of approaching how you sell. So these contracts can take years, typically take years. It's a lot of iterations, a lot of responding to RFPs and requests for additional information. But then the resulting contract can be very large. The personalities of these salespeople are very, very service-oriented, patriotic, service to our nation. Very dedicated, very transparent, and low key. So it's a methodical, careful culture that you're working in here. Okay, and finally, delivering a platform. So why platforms? I have another case study for this, and this was a company where I worked, and we were doing device procurement software that did both the procurement and the activation for the customer. And it was taking off. It was doing really well. Most of the other places I'd worked had some concept of a platform from the start and some APIs to plug into. This one didn't, and customers were coming fast, and each one needed some kind of change to the code that would mean a new build and a new engineering effort before they could deploy the product. So we were just getting buried by customer requests, even though they were in a very cohesive market. So I was general manager there, and what we did first was just get a system in place to prioritize and handle all these requests. That was all we could do. There was an architecture in the thought process. I didn't stay long enough to see it play out, but they did end up building a platform, and they weathered this storm. But I think they needed to start a little sooner in order to keep up. So what is a platform? It's your core feature set designed to be extended and configured. So once you kind of know what's becoming the core that everybody needs, that this is the part that you want to make so you can stamp out one after another without a lot of engineering, without any engineering work. So your infrastructure. It's versatile. It supports different application types. You can extend it. You can scale it. And in this talk, I'm just talking about something that you're using internally. Now, platforms, the idea of a platform can be extended into huge implications. The biggest companies in the world are all technology platforms. Either two-sided platforms where there's some kind of transaction, or extendable platforms like AWS. The two-sided ones like Uber or Facebook or whatever. So that's where this can go. But I think for the purposes of a startup, being pragmatic, you want to just start with a platform that makes it so that you don't have so much technical debt weighing down your engineering team. So how do you resolve the tension between you got to get this MVP, minimum viable product out, and designing a platform? I think as a habit, if you're building some base features, you make an internal API. It's not that much work for the value that you get, and you document it. When you see strong signs of product market fit, you really start getting this thought process in action a little more seriously.
So quick question on the internal API. As a product manager, do you get involved in the definition of that API?
No, I would
that may
encourage.
become part of the product later.
That's right. Yeah, at that point, it's just internal, but you want to encourage the engineering team to be doing that, or if you're the founder, then you want to be sure that's going on. Okay, so one basic here is this is beyond the product manager. This type of thinking needs an architect or a CTO or a lead engineer. So you want to partner with them as you think this through. And then think about what if you become the AWS of your market. What might that look like? Not a ton of thought, but a little bit, so that you think with that in mind now. So step one, think about what's your core functionality. What are the table stakes here for your product? So that the core functionality is the stuff that make people buy your product. And the table stakes are the other things you got to do, like security. And then look at how are they going to want to extend that? How are they going to want to customize that? So customization would be something users can do. It's presented in maybe a user interface or maybe via an API. And extensions would be something that partners or larger customers could do. And then finally, you just got to document, and you got to make that part of your engineering job description, that they document what they're doing to avoid a lot of future pain. Okay, and finally, talking about mindsets. Colleagues may have preconceived notions from doing projects, not products. So talk about what a market segment is. Why do we target one market at a time? What is a product? What's a platform? Why are we delivering like that? What's your methodology? You could use my picture of the stair steps that you're moving up, or there are a lot of other ones on the internet you could pull from as well. Where you are in that methodology, what you've learned, what's working, what's not working. And then what is the strategy and vision, so that they know what train they're on. Partnering with subject matter experts as a founder. Consider creating an advisory board and putting some of these experts on it. They can save you a lot of time and by giving you guidance in the field that you're now in. It's worth it to give them a little stock for that. And then for product managers, if you're new in the domain that you're now working, you'll want to partner with a subject matter expert from that domain, someone who really, maybe has a PhD in that field and knows it well. And then you provide these product frameworks, and they provide that expertise. I think sometimes product managers sell themselves short and assume everybody knows what these frameworks are and what you're doing on a customer visit, but that's not the case. You're the one that's got it ingrained in your brain to listen to these customers and find the opportunity and find the common opportunities. So you got to be out there doing that. And so you don't want the subject matter expert to replace those customer interactions. You want to get out there and be talking with customers. So just to wrap up, 3 main things to remember are use that B2B process. It's a great process. You can read there are tons of books about it around. I've got that little summary in the one slide. But it's very well worth it to apply it in these vertical markets as well. Strongly consider defense. It's a service to the nation, and it's a good market. And think about a platform. All right, thanks.
So I had a little colloquy with Roger Coven. I just wanted to play back to you a little bit. So you stress the value of a platform and talk about the fact that you need an architect to define the API. Is there a contribution that the product manager can make in terms of providing use cases, or aside from encouraging the development team to develop an API set that they can later expose, are there other ways that you've worked to shape that or to contribute to that?
Definitely, yeah. So, and it depends on the stage of things. So if it's just, so there's one, it's just the discipline of having those APIs, and that's more of an engineering way of working. That's not so much the product manager. But the part where the product manager can really contribute is understanding how customers are working with a product to really understand what's the core functionality that's important, that needs to be accessed and extended and configured. And that comes directly from customer use cases. So really kind of figuring out what configuration features are needed, and what customer facing APIs or flexibility will be needed. That's right in the wheelhouse of the product manager talking to the customers. And in these weekly calls that I talked about, that was like half what I was doing in those calls, was really understanding that stuff.
Other questions for Lee?
Yeah, this is Lester. I just had a quick question. Sometimes it's not about building a product, but it's re-envisioning a product. For example, I most recently was part of an effort to take what is an age-old instrument, which has been a benchtop instrumentation for labs for years, and try to make it a sensor, which is in production, attached to a tool. The technology is still the same, but the quality paradigm and the productivity paradigm now shifts to the point where the entire scaffolding of the product has to be reinvented. So how does that fit into this framework? I think it does fit into the framework, but I think the platform part of it is about rebuilding the product not so much as building the product.
Yeah. I would look at it as, yes, you're rebuilding it, but I'd think of it as new. If you were doing a new product, how would you serve the market and the solution or opportunity needed? And work backwards to, therefore, what should be built. And then you've got this nice extra asset that's the existing product, and how does it need to fit? And I think you're right, the integration with the rest of the system is big. So it's the fact that you've got the sensor is a piece, and then you got to do the other pieces.
Yep. And the challenge, it turns out, was the fact that the company was a late stage startup in Series D, where investors were banging their feet about getting scale and return on investment, after significant investment. And the pressure was to just put that product out there as an instrument and see where it lands. And that, at least a product manager is not supposed to allow that, because it's going to fit.
Well, one other option would be to get some objectives with this early launch that they wanted to do. Business objectives of what do we want to achieve by releasing this as is, and see if that's, when you look at it from a business objective, so you don't want to make the business objective to release the thing. You want it to be release the thing so that a certain set of results happen. and do it in that context. And it may be possible in a way to get interim revenue on your way to this bigger vision.
Yeah, and and that's what ended up being the focus of the product manager, was just rewrite the MRD. You know.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So we've got a couple other questions I'd like to get to before we break. Ed Keys talked about the advice of build one to throw it away, because especially when you're operating in arenas like space and IoT, where failure is a much higher risk than SaaS, how do you balance the exploration and reducing the unknowns with getting the MVP to market?
Let's see. So I'm trying to think how we did that. I think it was pretty messy, actually. We're kind of doing both at the same time.
That's why it's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question.
It's at the heart of a hard trade-off, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Reducing the risk, the technical risk there. I think you want to remember, in reducing technical risk, you want to also reduce business risk. So be working on both angles at the same time. But whether it's by, can you sell it, or does the pricing make sense, or does the revenue model make sense, all of that.
Ed, did you have any follow-up you wanted to add? Did I capture that, or did you have something you wanted to add?
No, that was captured quite great. I was targeting the question as kind of the MVP versus platform level, because it's sometimes difficult to design an API for something before you've built the first one and understand like where the points of commonality versus specificity are.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's why I say throw an API on everything, and then later, but it's internal, right? So later you can get more thoughtful about it.
Well, we have time for one final question before we break. Did we not get to anybody, or did someone have one they wanted to ask?
If nobody else jumps in, I'll
Please
take one. I just mentioned it in the chat. There's this, and others here will know better than I, but there's this notion of, when some people use the term MVP, they're talking about like the absolute minimal test you can use to learn something useful. So it could be like a, a test where you just throw a link out there and see how many people click it. And then the other notion of the MVP is, well, no, it has to actually be a product, a viable product. And so it's kind of like the first version of that viable product. What are your thoughts on how to sort of navigate that tension between early productization, developing the platform and the APIs, versus just getting something out the door so you can start to learn? Do those differing of notions of MVP help you, and can you sort of calibrate along that spectrum of where to go with the MVP?
Yeah, sure. So I think you want to introduce another term besides MVP, so you don't have to get into a definition question. And the other term is something like, a test. And then the test doesn't have to be a bunch of engineering. And then by the time you get to an MVP, you're actually building something that people can use for a little bit of real work. So in terms of terminology, I think that's how you want to can handle it. And when you're at the point of a test, you're not thinking about your platform yet. You don't worry about even APIs until you're writing some code that you're going to keep. And hopefully you can test without real engineering by using things like, some other mock-up. Then you get to, the ideal is if you can have the MVP after the sale. But then again, in many cases, you've got to build something to be credible with the customer. So if you have to do that, then at that point, you're building your MVP as a prototype. And the most you worry about at that point is having APIs to what you're already building. Does that make sense? I'd love other people's thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, we've got a couple. Go ahead.
I've used proof of concept unit as a way of not entering the MVP stage. So every customer has a different proof of concept, and then you blend them together into a MVP at some point. It would be a beta, alpha, and then you get into a beta.
Yeah.
It does seem like the amount of engineering work though is critical there, and being very cognizant of how much that investment is, how much of that investment there's going to be in the proof of concept or MVP or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah.
And based on that, based on how much of that engineering effort there's going to be, that's going to tell you how much you really need to think about the platform thinking. And if it's going to be a ton of engineering work, you probably don't want to just throw it all away at the end.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Something I didn't get into that came up with you all is eliminating risk as quick as you can, finding out, thinking through where's the big risk and can I mitigate it as early on in the process as you can.
Well, I think we'll leave that as the last suggestion. Lee, thanks very much for a great talk. We had a really good conversation and quite a thoughtful discussion.
Thank you all for coming. And thanks, Sean, for hosting me, and Teresa for setting this all up. It's been a lot of fun.
So just flip one more slide. We'll make the slides available. Lee's actually got a resource page that is also available, and the slides are online as a Google Doc along with a paper. So we'll post this all on the Lean Culture and Lean Startup meetup so you can get it. And thanks everybody for coming today.